Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Retaining Mobile App Users, Boost Engagement and Reduce Churn. My name is Fiona, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. The webinar will last for approximately 45 to 50 minutes. All attendees are on mute, so the only voices you should hear throughout the webinar will be mine and the presenters. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the chat box of the control panel. You can send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll collect these and address as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Please also be aware that you will receive a copy of today's recording within 24 to 48 hours of today's webinar. I'd now like to introduce Emily Buckman and Neil Banerjee. Over to you guys.
Thanks, Fiona. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Urban Airship Predicting User Churn and Mobile App Retention Benchmark webinar. We're really excited to share with you the learnings we've gathered about mobile app retention and how you can keep more of your hard-earned users. And we'll be sharing our full benchmark report along with some other useful tools for you via Fiona after the session. So before we get started, let's introduce ourselves properly. So my name is Emily Buckman. I'm a global mobile specialist and strategist at Urban Airship. And so my job is to work with clients all over the world to optimize their mobile engagement strategies. And I'm joined by my colleague, Neil.
Thanks, Emily. Yes, my name is Neil Banerjee, and I'm a Senior Product Manager here at Urban Airship, responsible for our two data products, Insight and Connect, and also our predictive churn feature.
So here's the agenda for today's discussion, but we're really focused on helping you learn a couple of key things today. New user retention data details the impact of messaging at different intervals in the app user lifecycle, including findings specific to some key industry verticals that we hope you'll find very relevant. Recommendations on when and what to message to increase new user retention rates, and an understanding of how predictive churn software works and how you can identify users at risk and take action while there's still time. So I think we're all in the same boat when we're trying to grow our audiences across our digital channels and in our apps specifically, and sometimes that's a big challenge, and one of the biggest challenges and barriers around that is user churn, unfortunately. So let's take a look at a few numbers. So app users are 20 times more engaged than website visitors, and this has reshaped what people respond to, and it's probably not a huge surprise because hopefully if you've built your app in a really brilliant way and it's delivering a great experience, then it's more personalized. So you'd expect users to be more engaged with it. And we know that customers now respond to in-the-moment utility, not blast communications. And we know this from our own experience as app users and customers, and we can see it in the numbers. We know that personalized notifications can see up to 7 times increase in response rate, and that digital is now influencing 56% of sales in retail, and the majority of that is now coming from mobile. And this is why it's so important that we deliver a really good app and messaging experience to grow your audience. Because actually one of the biggest disappointments is that up to 95% of app users delete an app after the first 90 days, which is not something any of us really want to see. And it costs us $1.50 or around £1.30 per app install. So if we're not able to change this number, then we start to see that we're losing around 95 pence of every pound that we're spending on working hard to acquire these app users. We really want to change how that looks. So we decided to build a study around this to understand what impact messaging could have on retention rates. And we analysed data coming from consumers that opened an app for the first time in September, and we tracked them all the way through to December in 2016, looked at their opt-in status, opening behaviour and in-app behaviour, and the number of notifications they were receiving and engaging with. So we've got data on opt-ins. We've also looked at opt-out, and across both of the core platforms, Android and iOS. And this led to 63 million app users being part of our study and 1,500 apps. And just to caveat on that, to be statistically relevant, we made sure that they had at least 5,000 downloads and at least 1,000 cumulative push notifications sent in 1 month. So, as we get started, let's have a quick look at the power of the Optin. I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Neil for this.
Thanks, Emily. Yes, if you're familiar with Urban Airship, every year we put out benchmarks on opt-in rates. Opt-in rates are very powerful if you're new to mobile and you haven't tried a different operating system. If you're on Android, most of the time for notifications, you're actually automatically opted in. So that's why we see such high Android opt-in rates across all the verticals. Whereas on iOS, it's an explicit permission that the user has to say yes or no to accept notifications. And we see that, generally speaking, across various verticals, where about 50% of users are opted in. You will notice that for utility and productivity, we do see a little bit of a higher opt-in rate. Obviously, there's a much tighter coupling between the messaging for a weather app. You want to know those notifications right away, as opposed to some of the other ones. But the really interesting thing that we see here is that as we move to the iOS 90-day retention, we see that opt-in rates for people that have opted in, the retention rates are much higher, so 39% longer on iOS. And this information is great to know. If we look at Android, we also see the same pattern here, except it's much longer. We're seeing 167% longer retention rate. But one of the things that happens from this is people always ask, well, is it just the people that are opting in that are making it retained? And so this new study that we've come out with, that Emily's going to give us an overview on here, really dives into the frequency of messaging and how the importance of that in terms of retention.
Thanks, Neil. Yes, absolutely. You can see how important it is to get the opt-in, and I think even if you are new to mobile, you know this from other channels as well. As marketers, we're all trying to increase our opt-in rates so that we can have really great conversations with our customers. So it's so important. And we have benchmark reports and other studies on opt-in rates and some great tips and advice on how you can improve your opt-in rates through your onboarding journey, and we can certainly share that with you following the webinar. So these are the frequency cohorts we looked at during the study. So you're going to see that we've looked at opted in and opted out and what difference messaging has and compared to a customer who's opted out and is not receiving anything. And we were really interested to see how this was going to turn out, because I'm sure a lot of you would have the same view of thinking perhaps weekly or daily plus certainly starts to wander into the territory of potential spamming or over messaging a customer, which is something we're all very scared of doing because we don't want to upset them, and a lot of us is very focused on governance and frequency. So I'm really excited to share the results because they were very surprising. So let's start with our baseline. So this graph shows you all the users that were opted in but received 0 notifications over that 90-day period that we looked at, and the results are not good, as you can see. 95% churn. We have just a 5% retention rate. What's even more unsettling about this is that 45% of the users that we analysed in this study didn't receive a single message over those 90 days, even though the apps that they were using had the capability to send them. So some great opportunities to change that dismal picture. So moving on to what can be achieved with messaging. So this is looking at both platforms, and we're going to dive into each one in a second to have a look at some of the differences, because there are certainly a few key differences there between Android and iOS. But you can see here the impact in retention that messaging can have. So up the left-hand side, you'll see the retention rate and the period of time across the bottom, and hopefully you can all follow this relatively easily. So you've got our baseline at the bottom of 0 notifications, achieving a 5% retention rate. But then you can see, as we move up slightly and you start to introduce even one message in 90 days, or 1 or 2 a month, that you start to get a higher retention rate, 2 times in fact. But you're netting out about the same as an average opted out customer at this point, so you're not really getting any great net benefit. That picture starts to change when you move up to sending weekly messages and daily messages. That's when the real benefit starts to come in, and you start to see a big increase in retention of 6 times. What was most surprising to us was that daily plus messages, so brands sending out multiple messages a day in some cases, were achieving 10 times the retention rate of an app sending out 0 notifications. And obviously, we'll talk about how you manage that volume of messages, and it's certainly we can say that we know that these brands are doing it well, or these customers wouldn't be opted in. So let's look at Android for a second specifically. You can see the base rate again at the bottom, hovering around 4% rate. But you can see again, same kind of pattern, moving up to that daily plus rate, where you suddenly see a 41% retention rate, which is, for Daily Plus, a 910% increase on 0 notifications. But you can see as well that when you start to get to the sort of weekly level and the daily messaging, that's when you start to really create the difference. So lots of opportunity there with Android, certainly. And for iOS, it's a similar pattern. Although for iOS, there's naturally a much higher rate of retention than Android, and we feel that that's partly because when you have an iPhone, you will be asked to opt into notifications specifically. So these users are expecting them and are generally perhaps more engaged. But we're starting at a higher point of around 15% retention as a baseline, moving up to the Daily Plus mark of around 52%. So it is definitely something to consider when you're doing forecasting for your app around retention and growth and engagement. And there's a really big opportunity here, as you can see. So just looking across these verticals now, you can see the percentage of opted-in users that are receiving 0 or just 1 push notification. For Android, that was 43% of the entire audience that we studied literally only received 0 or 1, and 32% for iOS. And these two notifications, as we've seen, are kind of hovering in the 5 to 10% retention range. So we know we could do a lot better than that. So finding opportunities to message our users more frequently, but in a relevant context, definitely presents a great opportunity for us as app managers and for our businesses in terms of the impact that that's going to have on revenue and customer retention overall. But this kind of requires a new way of thinking, and I'm sure some of you are already thinking, oh my goodness, I can't think of what I would talk to my customers about every single day, and I'm still not sure that's the right thing to do. But it does require this new way of thinking, and it's very tempting for us as marketers to focus on messages that our business wants to send, whether it's a sale that we're running or a big event, or we're in the middle of a huge quarterly campaign and we want to be able to extend that out to messaging. But that kind of desktop internet model of marketing funnel that's purely focused on transactions isn't enough when it comes to apps and messaging. Now the phone provides us with brilliant real-time engagement loop data, where real-time data on preferences can spark real-time experiences and therefore messaging. And throughout this loop, we're collecting data all the time. From the moment someone first downloads and opens your app, as they move through their onboarding experience and start to discover features, perhaps they're signing in or they're signing up to an account, they might be letting you know about some of their preferences and filling out profile sections. As we move through towards conversion, where they may be showing interest in specific product categories, or purchasing or adding something to their basket and not actually completing, for example, that could apply to many other different types of apps with processes within them. Rewards, loyalty, right through to inactivity, when we start to see that for some reason our users just aren't engaging as frequently anymore. right round to re-engaging those users. So you're collecting this data all the time, which will help you to build more personalised and contextual messaging. One of the easiest ways to do this is to create automations off of some of these key actions and behaviours that users are taking inside your app, because then you know it will always be relevant, it will always be sent at the right time to the right user, and therefore ultimately deliver a really strong experience. So map these things out on a user journey board for your brand or your app. What would these specific steps be for you? And translate these into a messaging strategy or an automation flow. So we're now going to take a look at some of this data in more detail and focus on a couple of very specific verticals. So hopefully your app will fit into one of these. So over to you, Neil.
Thanks a lot, Emily. So our first category here is the retail app category. Almost 20 million users in this category. It's our largest category overall. 210 apps. You can see the list of types of apps that are included in this category. Now I'm going to kind of walk you through the template of how we're going to be presenting this data. So this chart here shows us the number of notifications that a user received over the first 90 days. And we've kind of marked here weekly, which is around, if you were getting 12 messages, a little bit north of 12, we've got the bucket here at 15. That's about getting a weekly send. So you can understand that almost, it's about 20% of the audience here that's opted in is getting a weekly send on Android. You can also see 0, so that we also have a large cohort of people at 0. And then at daily, we're seeing about 7% of people on Android. So as we go through each of the verticals, kind of make a note of the shape of this curve, because in the next chart, we actually show you broken down. We're going to go platform by platform. So here's Android. And now we're looking at the retention of these users in the retail vertical. And you can see here that people who are opted out are a little bit higher, actually, in retention than users that didn't receive any notifications. And as we start to move up, you can see the big break here in clumping. So as we move from 2x, 2 times a month, north of daily and weekly plus, we start to get a much higher retention rate. So, really kind of showing us that being able to create a messaging strategy that is based around the behaviors of a person with your brand really can help to increase that retention of those users. If we take a look at iOS here, we see that even higher retention rates occur. For Daily Plus, we're receiving almost 50% retention. So not entirely the highest retention rate we'll see, but one of the highest retention rates. And another thing to notice here, again, is that if you take a look at the opt-out line, the blue line in the bottom section, if you're messaging a person once a month, you're actually doing worse. You're doing a disservice to yourself by only doing a message once. We see that retention rates are very low there. So it's really interesting to see from the data that actually sending notifications at a very low frequency can hurt you quite a bit. And on to media.
Yeah, so in the media category, we had 10.5 million users and 727 apps, and I'm sure most of us have got 1 or 2 of these on our devices, getting our breaking news stories and sports updates and everything. So messaging really is critical for these guys. So let's have a look at the distribution by notification volume. You can see this is a very different picture to what we just saw for retail. The majority are getting either 0 or 1 notification, or completely the other end of the spectrum, getting Daily Plus notifications. So for Android, 43% of the audience for media is only receiving one notification or none. And for Apple, it's 28%. So complete polar opposites. When we look at Android specifically, you can see that even one message in the first 90 days is going to surpass the experience of an opt-out user and their retention rate and deliver around a 12% increase. But you really need to move up to the daily or daily plus level for the best retention rates, where you start to see that creep up to around 40%. And then for iOS, it's an even greater story. So at the 0 level, you're moving from about a 12% baseline retention rate right up to 50% when you're doing daily plus. And, users clearly expect to be kept in the know. Media apps have really high opt-in rates, and it's because, you want to hear about the news and the sports and the updates that matter to you frequently. So it's one of the verticals where this is probably the easiest to achieve in terms of those messaging. So it's a real shame that, just under half of the apps that we studied still aren't sending users messaging at all. So on to sports and recreation.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, so in sports and recreation, we have about 6 million users and 163 apps. You'll notice here that the pattern of percentage of audience split by notification sends is very similar to the media app. So if you're thinking about, a sports app that's about football or cricket, you're going to want to be getting those notifications while the game's going on, before the game's starting, and maybe even getting player updates throughout the week. But what's very interesting here is that we're seeing almost north of 30% of the audience getting 0 notifications for some apps. Whereas on iOS, you see at the 210, we have almost 35%. So there is a big goalpost pattern again here, and we'll see that as we look at the distribution of frequency, we can see that again Daily Plus does a really good job of giving us the highest retention rates. But when you look at, twice a month, if you're a sports app and you're sending messages only twice a month or weekly, you're going to see a much lower retention rate. And this is really where it's important to see the effects of automation. If you're having somebody go in and manually send messages at twice a month or weekly, you're not going to be doing as well as if you can automate your systems and send messages out based on the actual actions that are happening during game time. With iOS, we see very similar results again when compared to Android. Opt-outs, are performing on par with weekly sends, which is pretty amazing, saying that people who say they don't want any messages, their retention rates are about the same as if you're sending a weekly message. But again, with iOS, we're seeing a much higher retention rate at 55% at Daily Plus. So Emily, back to you for utility and productivity.
Yeah, and this is our last vertical deep dive. And in this category, we were analysing just under 7 million users across 167 apps. And this is a really interesting category for me because I think utility and productivity apps have a naturally strong retention rate because they tend to be, our banking apps, navigation and weather and reference apps that we use quite frequently. And they have one of the highest opt-in rates of all the verticals that we look at. So for iOS, the opt-in rate is 57%, and on Android it's 87%, which is really, really strong. But again, you can see here that the majority of users in this cohort aren't receiving any messages at all. For iOS there it's 33%, and for Android 24%, which is again a real shame. We've got some utility apps starting to send weekly messages and a few, very small amount, sending daily messages. But opted-in users are retained 49% longer on iOS and 62% longer on Android when they're compared to opted-out users. So it's really important that if you're working in this vertical, that you have the confidence to start messaging users more regularly. And users are expecting more engagement from their utility apps. You can see here that Daily and Daily Plus are really where the retention gains are being made. Everything else is not really creating much of a net benefit. And then on the iOS side, you can see that all of the less frequent cohorts are kind of all bunched together, again, not really seeing a lot of net benefit. But when you start to move to weekly on iOS, and then daily and Daily Plus, you start to see a huge impact and difference there. So let's have a little look at recommendations off the back of some of this data. I'm wondering if any of this has surprised you, and perhaps this will come out in the questions that we review at the end. But really, what we've looked at, how you can look at the life cycle of an app customer or an app user to start to build some of these messaging use cases and automations. But another lens to look at is marrying up your goals and the goals of your business with your users' goals. The most common ones we find are in the circles that you can see on the screen. So, ultimately as an app user, we all just want to be informed, we want to save money or save time, we want a simple, intuitive experience, we're reminded about things that matter to us, and that we have some fun in the app as well. And as a brand, we want to reach more of our audience, engage with them, retain them, get them to spend more money, and just generally have a high sort of perceived value and net promoter score for our brand. So good messaging reflects the intersection of these two circles, your brand and your user goals. And your users aren't going to return unless there's value for them. And that value exchange is really important, both in the app experience, but also in the messaging experience. It's a key part of that onboarding journey. When you're going to want your users to start giving over information to you, you need to make sure that you're also giving value back to them, so that they stay in the process and ultimately, retain your app and use it actively and frequently. And that retention starts by getting that opt-in at the beginning and having that clear value proposition for your app. And ways to add value include being personalized and delivering targeted content. So personalization is absolutely one of the three things that I always talk to clients about as being a critical pillar in your strategy. The next is contextual. So why does it matter here and now to that person, where they are in this moment? Why do they need to receive that message? And then frictionless. What do you actually want them to do with that message? How can you make the experience really seamless? And remind them of available utility, automate on those behaviors, and deliver specific offers to your customers as well. And how do you take it a step further and get ahead of the curve? So we know that even with the best messaging strategies, you can still lose up to 50% of your app audience. So how do you get ahead of that a little bit and start to prepare? So anticipating those life cycle stages is definitely key. And as part of our platform, we have lists in the segment engine where you can see what volume of users you have that are moving into a dormant state and not using your app actively anymore. And you can see that over different periods of time. But you can also capture the interests and preferences of your users upon their first app open or within their first few times of use, so that you can use that as an opportunity to send them a message when they reach a goal or get more loyalty points, hit a certain tier, for example. Provide a reason to authenticate, and whether that's signing in or registering or perhaps adding their loyalty card to the app, so that you can capture them in secondary channels such as email. Retargeting users who've engaged with other messaging from you, so that gives you some sort of profiling information about their interests because they've opened certain kinds of messages and therefore triggered specific tags, which now put them into a certain segment. And definitely design and test, A/B test, some really compelling inactivity messaging and have that ready. Work out what works for your users or your different cohorts of users, how you can add value, whether that's using offers to lure them back in, new app features, seasonal content, whatever it might be. Make sure that you have a plan there that's tested and ready to implement with those customers before they reach that point. And notifications are really just key for reminding users of the value of your app and creating a habit, more importantly, of using your app as the primary channel to engage with your brand and to explore. And it's likely that most users are going to miss some of your notifications. I mean, we're all guilty of this. You're in the supermarket, you're out with friends, you're busy with your kids, and you just clear the screen, and you're not going to engage with it. So that kind of it leads to explain a little bit why weekly, daily, and daily plus have the biggest impact on retention rates across all the verticals. But there's definitely still people that feel like they can't message every day, they don't want to be that intrusive on a customer's device, and they're worried about the negative impact that it could have for them and their brand. And one of the ways that we work with clients to get around this is by implementing something called a message center. And that's essentially like an inbox inside your app. Think of it a bit like email, but it's a very natural part of the navigation of your app, and a user knows no different. It's seen to be a part of it. But within there, you can deliver rich HTML content, and you can alert a user to this content by simply adding a number to your badge icon on their home screen. So instead of having a notification light up the screen and all this text appear, they can just literally see that there's some new content in the message center for them to go and view. And within there, you can still have all of the calls to action, embed videos, do all kinds of exciting creative things, and set expiry dates against it so that it always remains relevant for your audience. So how do we really get ahead of the curve and start to take action before it's too late? Neil's going to tell us about something really exciting that we've been working on around predictive churn and machine learning.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks for laying that foundation of the different types of tactics that we can take to retain users. Let's just go back through the data we walked through. So we're seeing, a high number of users that are retained. Almost 50% of users are retained at the Daily Plus stage. But there's still a big gap. You've got more than 50% of your users that are churning. And there's a lot of money tied into that cohort, time and effort and money that you've spent to actually acquire those users. And so what we've done is we've taken a look at what we can do to be able to build a system that allows us to understand when a user is going to churn before they actually become inactive. And so we've built a machine learning model that looks at a lot of different data points and categorizes users into different risk categories so that you can take action on those users, whether it's with your weekly or daily campaigns, or if you want to automate that. So let me walk you through a little bit of the model. I'm not going to get down into the math of it. I'm going to keep it pretty high level. So here we're looking at over 10 billion data points. So we take not only data points from your app, we also train the model on all the data that we have and the key user inputs, and all the information is down at the user level. So we take the operating system into account. You can see in the data that the behavioral patterns of people on Android and iOS are very different. So it's very important to take that information into this model to train it. We take your app, your specific app, into account in this model so that your app gets a prediction that is based on the behavior of people in your app, but also if there are correlations to other apps, it can learn from that too. And then we look at opens and sends, and the model that we use correlates these two and looks at the recency and frequency of opens and sends for a user. So we take all that data and we put it into a machine learning model. We train it against historical data that tells us which users actually ended up churning. And then what we do is we feed in data that's live. And we make predictions about your users, and we place them into three categories: high, medium, and low. It's a really easy system to use. Once you have those categories, then what you can do is you can start to build a messaging strategy around that. So for your high-risk users, you might want to offer them a free product. Come into the store and get a free product. For the medium risk users, these are going to be people that, they'll probably stay around for a little bit, but they will leave at some point. So maybe not give them something completely for free, but in this case, we're going to do a buy one, get one free. And then for the low risk users, they're most likely to stay with your app. And so provide them relevant information about a product that you have. So one of the things that's really important here is in our systems, we're taking this risk category of a user and we're able to combine that with all these other elements of the user. So not only are you able to look at the risk category of a user, you'd also be able to see what types of events did they do. So did a low-risk user actually attain a certain goal in your app? And maybe that's a goal that's important to drive people to reduce the number of people that are in your high-risk category. We've made it really easy to consume this information. We've created really visually stunning dashboards in our Insight product that take all of this data and make it really easy to understand the categories of people and why they're actually in those risk groups. We've also made it easy for you to have confidence. Machine learning is very new. A lot of people don't trust a black box type of model. And so what we do is we provide you this historical view of predictions that we've done in the past. In this example here, what we're trying to show is that people who are on the left side in the high-risk category ended up becoming inactive or continued staying in the high-risk category. And so this can build confidence that the model is actually working in categorizing users in a high-risk category. Obviously, if you're taking action, these people in the high-risk category should be moving down to the medium-risk or low-risk category as well. And we've layered this product across all of our products. So we have another product, a Connect product, which allows you to get all this data down to the user level into your data warehouses. So your BI teams can take these predictive scores and then connect it with other data points that they might have. So you might be able to connect that to your customer service records or CRM and really understand why is it that a user is going to a low, medium, or high risk category, and take action in a different channel as well. So not only the mobile channel, but maybe in-store or on a different medium. And then finally, we talked a lot about automation. So we've built this directly into our automation product. You're able to send messages out when a person transitions into a certain risk category, and this can be very powerful so that you're sending those messages at the right time before a user churns out. So let's hand it back to Emily, and she'll walk us through some of the key takeaways and resources available to you.
Thanks so much, Neil. That was brilliant and very insightful. I think it's probably hopefully given everyone lots to think about. So a couple of key takeaways from all of the data that we've seen, and thank you for sticking with us for so long through lots of graphs. App publishers are leaving a lot of money on the table by not messaging users. So we know zero messages has the highest churn rate, even more than customers who are opted out of messaging entirely. So these users are opting in, and we should take advantage of that and make sure that we're messaging them and we're not losing as many of our users as we are currently. Opt-in users are rewarding app publishers who frequently message them, and we can see that from these daily and daily plus messages. They're seeing the value coming from the apps and these messages, and so they're keeping them and staying more active, and that's brilliant. And predictive churn gives app publishers visibility into user-level churn and makes it easy to take action while there's still time, and that's the key thing there. As I said earlier, 50% of users will churn despite a great messaging strategy. We're all very precious about the space on our devices and what takes that up, and which apps to keep and which need to go because you're not using them enough. So, being able to predict through that kind of modeling when someone is likely to move into one of those high-risk categories and take action then is a really, really key step. So we've got a lot of resources that we would love to share with you. If you're new to Urban Airship, you can sign up for a free trial and actually check out the tool properly. We have on our website a document section and lots of resources with how-to guides, best practices, benchmark reports, and we talk a lot about the different kinds of messaging that are available, outside of standard notifications such as in-app messaging, interactive notifications, and how you can use custom events and tags for measurement, but also for creating some of these automations we've talked about for a more of a real-time, relevant user experience. We also have a fantastic blog where we have experts from all over our business publishing posts every week. You'll find things in there about how to make a successful app, how to earn push notification opt-ins, addressing and winning back dormant customers, and all of the sort of mobile app marketing how-to series. There's tons in there, so please do go and check it out, download reports, sign up to the blog post so that we can continue to give you tips on all of these things that matter to you. And with that, I want to say thank you very much. Before we move over to Q&A, we're just going to pop a brief polling question onto your screens. We'd really love to know what you'd like to learn more about when it comes to apps and mobile engagement. So if you could just select one of the following 4 options: how predictive churn analytics could work for your app, using my mobile analytics to inform cross-channel marketing efforts, refining and defining my mobile app strategy, or increasing engagement across all of my messaging channels. If you could just take a second to do that, we'd really appreciate it. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we'd love to open it up to questions now from our audience. So Neil, do we have any questions that have come through?
Yeah, so the first question here is, do you have an opinion about why the greater frequency of messaging doesn't have the negative impact on retention we'd normally expect?
Yeah, so certainly. I think this largely comes down to the relevancy that we were talking about. So we've done a lot of studies on personalization and the impact that has on engagement rates as well. And we know that we see a 5 to 7 times higher rate with personalized messages. And these messages, if they're relevant to you, then they're genuinely useful, and they're going to do the complete opposite to putting you off and making you want to delete the app. They're going to make you want to engage with it more and remember that it's there and come in even when you don't receive a message. Ultimately, your app users are probably your biggest fans and your most loyal customers. So they probably love hearing from you, especially if they're getting value from it, like we talked about earlier, and getting exclusive offers or previews or some kind of additional benefit for them having the app on their device. Neil, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that one of the key things here is that, and it kind of dovetails into the next question as well. You don't want to be just blasting messages like you said, but really, how do you tie the behavior of users down to messaging to the app? And so I'll kind of dovetail this into the next question, which is, what are the automation platforms that we would recommend to help increasing messaging frequency? And it really starts with what Emily explained about kind of charting out the user experience. What are the different points in time that a user is actually interacting with your brand? And then look at the systems that have that information. You can then, once you know what behaviors you want to track, and then understanding which systems actually track that, then what you can easily do is you can connect that into a system like Urban Airship. So Urban Airship allows you to take not only events that are happening on the mobile app, but also events from a different server. So let's say that you have a point of sale system and you have information coming into there. Well, you can have that system actually send us a message, and we will relay that back down to the user. And so really understanding what behaviors and what messaging is relevant at each point of the customer's journey, and then figuring out the systems to then connect. You can usually, most of these marketing automation systems have the ability to send messages in an automated fashion. One thing that you do want to make sure you look at is how quickly those messages get sent out. So, at Urban Airship, we really pride ourselves at being the fastest and having the highest scale. So we can deliver billions of notifications in a very short amount of time. And so when you are looking for an automation platform, you do want to make sure that any messages that are triggered by behavior actually end up at the right moment in time for the user. So if they need to get there fast, you will want to pick a platform that is very quick.
Great, thanks, Neil.
That's great, thanks, Emily.
Sorry, Fiona.
Sorry, continue, sorry.
I was just going to say we had another question come in around which types of notification are most effective, and this definitely varies a little bit around particularly whether someone's opted in or opted out, and the strength of the message that you're trying to get across in the notification. So if it's something really urgent and really highly valuable to a user, then an intrusive kind of push notification is probably the best way to get attention and bring people into the app. And that can be supplemented now with richer techniques, thanks to the iOS 10 release around rich notifications, and Android also delivering similar capabilities. We see around a 56% higher engagement rate with some of these rich notifications that include images now than standard text. But when it comes to reaching your opted-out users, you obviously also have the option to message them inside the app. So the first time they've opened the app in a while, they're going to suddenly see a pop-up message. But the message center is an even stronger way, again, the richer version of the experience to deliver that content. And then you can also use the badge icon to draw attention to the fact that there's new content for the user.
Great. Yeah. And also, I think, the other thing to think about as well is for the message center, we talked about that as well. You can really deliver rich content. We're seeing some of our customers actually taking the message center, this idea of having a content management system, and using that as a platform to deliver very rich content directly into the app. So not just putting it in the inbox or calling it an inbox, but actually bringing it to the forefront of the app and using it to display very rich videos and content as well. So we'll move on to the next question here, which is, would these findings be for free apps or paid apps? In this study, we actually didn't break out free or paid. Most of the apps in our system are free to download. We didn't look at the gaming vertical. That's where you would see the most type of free downloads, but then you pay to, get more levels unlocked or something like that. So the majority of these apps, I would guess, are free, but we didn't really break the data out between free or paid here.
Okay, and we've had another question about how do you think an app would benefit a company which provides a service rather than a product? I think the key for me is about the experience that the app delivers, and I think an app should do one or other of these two things. It should either help a customer to do something they already do with your brand in an easier, faster, more efficient, or more fun way, or it should introduce a whole new feature or new transaction or way of engaging with your brand. So I think it works definitely for both, and for service organizations, sometimes you can create some really cool app experiences to get more regular engagement with the brand. If it's not, if you don't have the kind of brand where a customer is able to transact in a particularly regular fashion, it certainly applies to both principles, whether you're a product or a service-led organization.
All right, let's take a look here. Okay, so the next question is, can you tell us which clients you have worked with for this technology? Emily, do you want to try to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So we work with clients and major brands all over the world in many different verticals. Some of the key ones, I suppose, that we could mention, we work with Adidas, we work with the Carlton Hotel Group, we work with Sky in the UK, William Hill, Wall Street Journal, and Shop Direct. So we work with a huge volume of the biggest media organisations and also retailers as well, travel companies. So yes, we work with some really major brands that are implementing this. And I think one thing to note, certainly from my experience of working with some of these huge organisations, that as a consumer you would expect to be incredibly advanced in this area. You know, they're often not, and they're still struggling sometimes, many of our clients, to bring all of their data into one centralised place, as Neil was talking about, you know, not having data sitting in silos, being able to utilise and leverage all of that data for better mobile messaging experiences. And some of them are really at the early stages of personalising their messaging and doing a great job with their apps. So it's, you know, you'd be surprised. So definitely don't feel disheartened, anyone on here, if you feel like you're still at the very beginning of creating these kinds of experiences.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Next question is how to connect with us. We do have lots of ways to connect with us. You can look at our corporate website, and at the bottom you can follow us on Twitter at Urban Airship, and you can sign up for a blog to get updates via email when we do posts. So there's a lot of different ways to connect with us to get content there. The next question here is, what open rate trends did you see versus notification frequency groups? So we didn't split the data out exactly like that, but generally speaking, the way we look at open rates, we look at people who tap on a notification, and those are usually have a much lower conversion, a much lower number, because you know the likelihood of you tapping on a notification and opening the app can be pretty low. Not everybody knows about that. But one of the other ways that we track opens is a user opening the app after getting a notification. And so that is actually tied into that retention number, because if they're opening the app, then they're an active user. So you can kind of think of it like that, although we didn't present the data as what the open rates are for those different categories.
And Neil, one final question. What's the main reason for Android users being more inclined to opting in than Apple users?
Yeah, so unless the developer actually takes the time to implement a opt-in flow on the app, users are basically automatically opted into notifications when they download the app. We recommend that developers implement a sign-up flow which shows the value of notifications so people understand what they're getting, and then provide the ability for people to control the permissions on the types of messages that they want to get, whether it's on Android or iOS.
Great, thanks, Neil. So there are a couple of questions in the queue that are pretty specific, and we'd like to get back to you individually. So please know that we haven't forgotten you, and we want to hear a bit more about your particular challenge so that we can help you out with that. So with that, I'm going to hand back over to Fiona and say thank you so much for joining us today and sticking with us throughout the webinar. We really hope that you found it useful and informative.
Yes, thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Neil and Emily, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Retaining Mobile App Users, Boost Engagement and Reduce Churn. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd appreciate it if you could complete that and provide your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording of today's webinar. On behalf of CIM and Urban Airship and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.